We're hugely privileged today to welcome as our lecturer Cardinal Luis Tagle. I first heard His Eminence when we both spoke at a conference in Leuven on poverty, hiddenness and the incarnation about 13 years ago. And I was so struck by the content and delivery of his lecture then, and I have to say his person, that I was absolutely delighted that he managed to fit this small town in the Fens into his really uber busy schedule as an archbishop of a vast, thriving archdiocese, and well as a cardinal, the youngest, one of the closest collaborators of the Pope. Besides looking after the church in the Philippines, Cardinal Tagle is a scholar of Vatican II, a much-loved and much sought-after lecturer and commentator on matters to do with ethics, development, poverty, and of course matters Catholic, and a frequent media presence. He has a weekly television broadcast, for instance, in the Philippines. He is president of the Global Federation of Charities Caritas Internationalis, so his perspective is truly global. And as Pope Francis encourages us all to go beyond our comfort zones, to go to the margins, to make our outlook more broad, more merciful and more compassionate, I suspect that Cardinal Tagle is a very good example of just that, and no wonder that he's been dubbed in some media as Asia's Francis. So, forgive me, Your Eminence. So the Cardinal will talk for about 50 minutes or so, and then there will be a chance for about 20 minutes for questions from the audience before we move somehow over there, over the chairs, for a drink and a chance for a more informal interaction. So without further whittering from me, Your Eminence, we very much look forward to hearing you on the topic of the contributions of Catholicism to a secular university in the third millennium.
Good afternoon to everyone. If you don't hear me clearly, it's not your fault. It's not the microphone's fault. It's my fault. Jet lag. But I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to greet the master, Mr. Bullock. Thank you for coming. It is truly a privilege to have been invited to give this annual von Hügel lecture. And I thank Dr. Philip, the director of the Institute, for trusting that I could contribute to the mission of this Institute through this lecture. And at the outset, I bring you warm greetings from the Philippines and the Archdiocese of Manila. It's very warm there right now, in all senses of the word. And it is also providential that Dr. McCosker has given me a broad title, to develop the contributions of Catholicism to a secular university in the third millennium. So we will be here until the second coming of Christ, trying to figure out this topic. But so it's quite daunting. But he also said that I could tweak or change as I would like. So using my background as a former student in the university, I graduated from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Also my experience as a university teacher, later on as a bishop and now as a cardinal, and also president of Caritas Internationalis and the Catholic Biblical Federation. I will try to offer some ideas and also some experiences. And of course I cannot forget that I am before you as an Asian and as Filipino. That will shine through. I sound Filipino. Can you understand my English? Wow, you're strange. But the Holy Spirit is at work. The Catholic Church can count the birth of universities as one of its contributions to humankind and to history. And through the years, the educational institutions of the Church have been vehicles of its mission to evangelize and to bring to bear the resources and the wisdom of the Catholic faith on society and the challenges it is facing. Now, with secular universities flourishing all over the world and becoming a viable option even for Catholics, the Church continues to hold that it has much to share in the search for truth and for authentic humanity happening in secular universities. Now, I believe that Catholicism can and should contribute to secular universities because, in the first place, it shares many things in common with secular universities as far as engagement in education and human formation is concerned. I would like to name a few of those common elements that Catholicism shares with secular universities. I have three. The first is this: Catholicism and secular universities understand and appreciate the value of tradition. Tradition. Tradition springs from a foundational message or inspiration, which is later on lived and is transmitted and is appropriated by other people. So one tradition allows for diverse strands and expressions. I just came from Lebanon a few days ago, and I had to participate in liturgies of the Maronite Catholics. You know it's the same Catholic world. You know it's the same worship. It's the same Word of God. But it expressed in its own unique Maronite way. The Roman Catholics at the end of the Mass, we ordained kiss the altar. There, the presider will say, "Goodbye, altar, till we meet again." But I'm not sure I would be back. But with God's grace, I will meet you again. And suddenly I understood why the Roman tradition kisses the altar, thanks to the Maronites. Tradition generates a culture, indeed becomes a culture. Here I loosely use tradition and culture. John Carrera y Carrera, a Jesuit in Barcelona, describes culture and tradition this way: the whole complex of forms of feeling, acting, and thinking shared by a society which allows members of the group to survive, provides them a sense of identity and belonging, and gives their lives meaning. And we can basically say the same things of tradition. But as tradition is received through time by various peoples, its creative potentials could either be enriched or adulterated. Tradition, therefore, demands a constant process of purification or conversion. Purification and conversion of the persons who make up the tradition or culture, so that the tradition could be more authentic and life-giving. Conversion. Now, tradition and culture comprise various elements. Bernard Lonergan, another Jesuit from Canada, sister, Canadian, in his method in theology, identifies 6 realms of meaning corresponding to the desires and the demands of the human spirit that constitute tradition. And they are common sense, sound tradition rests on common sense. Then theory. The university is good in that. I suppose there's also a lot of common sense in the universities. Theory, interiority, transcendence, scholarship, and art. You see those elements in a tradition, and you see all of those elements supported by universities and also by churches. Now, the second common element between Catholicism and secular universities is community. A community is both a fruit and a bearer of tradition or culture. The church is a community mediated by a foundational message called the Gospel of Jesus Christ. The first letter of St. John bears this out. What we have seen with our eyes, what we have heard with our ears, and touched with our hands regarding the word of life, we in turn share with you. And now there's communion between the proclaimer and the listener. The testimony of an apostle, a witness to another person, is the point of communion. A very human, ordinary communion centered on the word of life that is simultaneously communion with God. Community is not simply an aggregation of persons. Community is an event. It happens in encounters, in human exchanges, in an experience of transcendence that makes of the ordinary profoundly extraordinary, because the ordinary is charged with meaning and overflows with meaning. But saying this also means that community stands on authentic communication. And community collapses when communication is distorted. Secular universities and Catholicism both strive to maintain the integrity of communication so that we could serve integral community life. How important communication is, and to constantly purify communication. The third common element: Catholicism and secular universities have a responsibility to a larger world. We have a responsibility to historical moments and to spaces that we occupy, geographical and human spaces. Closed in on themselves, both Catholicism and universities wither. Centers of higher education are expected to be agents of social transformation. Through their tradition of scholarship, sustained by a vibrant community of communicators, they are expected and they are sent, missioned, to study pressing issues like social inequality, exclusion, violence, and ecological degradation. The Church has always maintained that its philosophical and theological wisdom has a valuable role to play in universities as they strive for social change. Skills, no matter how important, are not sufficient to educate and form responsible citizens and leaders of society. The communication between faith and reason, especially in an increasingly secular world, could benefit the wider society. the so-called courtyard of the Gentiles, promoted by Pope Benedict XVI, is one such initiative. And yesterday, in an audience granted by Pope Francis to the members of the Congregation for Catholic Education, I'm one of them, the Pope indicated three expectations among many expectations. Three expectations of Catholic universities in today's social realities. The first is humanization of education. Education in authentic humanity. Secondly, the development of a culture of dialogue. And thirdly, fostering hope. I guess secular universities could embrace those same expectations and desires coming from the Pope. Are we still here? I have to wake up. Because according to my watch, it's 12:20, past midnight. So let me continue. In the common search for authentic humanity and authentic community at the service of our common world and home, our common earth, Catholicism and secular universities can and must work together. Now I will illustrate how some basic insights from the Catholic tradition could contribute to our common concerns. And I would like to focus on the way Catholicism, in its various strands, and now enriched by its ecumenical dialogue, and also its interreligious dialogue in Asia especially, how our commitment to the incarnation of the Word and creation, how this is expanded in a sacramental, not only practice and lifestyle, but a sacramental worldview. It is, when we say sacramental, it's not just about rituals. It is a way of perceiving things because you take the incarnation seriously and you take creation as a gift of God. Now, this particular gift I want to show as contributory to our common search for a more authentic humanity, and a more authentic global, even ecological community. I hope I will have time to develop them. Initially, I have three here. The world of communication. I talked about distorted communication. So what can we do about communication? Secondly, inequality and exclusion. And third, the healing of the wounded. So the first, communication. We have so many means of communication now. You have the mobile phones, you have internet, you have Skype, you have FaceTime, you have Facebook, you have all of these things. But are we communicating? If we look at what's happening in the world, all the bickering and all the hatred, the harsh words, I think even with all the means of communication, we have not learned how to communicate. Especially if the fruit of communication is communion and community, then I don't think we're really communicating. And it should be the concern of universities. Most universities have, how do you call them now, departments of communications or social communications. But what does communication mean? Here, I would like to borrow some ideas from the French philosopher Fabrice Hajjaj, who was a convert from Judaism. He became a Christian. And with his solid background in the Hebrew scriptures, and now his entry into the Catholic tradition, he proposes to us some very important elements about communication. In his book, Comment parler de Dieu aujourd'hui? Is communication a matter of strategy? Some so-called experts in the art of communication claim that to speak effectively, one needs to use techniques to get and to sustain the attention of the hearers. You're even told to enhance your appearance. to impress especially the young. You're even told to imitate those who advertise products. But if we employ strategies, solely strategies, are we not making communication quite manipulative of persons? Is it permissible to manipulate persons? And for Christians, is it permissible to manipulate the hearers of the Word of God? Would we not bring, by doing so, evangelization to the level of other deformed and defective communication, like gossip, lies, ideological propaganda, and fancy rhetoric? The proper context of human communication is not manipulation, but covenant relationship. In the book of Genesis, I think we had this as a reading yesterday, God created beasts and birds so that the first human being would have helpers. He gave them names, but he found none of them fit for him. It was another human being, bone of his bones, flesh of his flesh, that was the suitable partner. He named her woman. True communication or naming occurs in the covenant of partners, in the covenant of mutual recognition and respect, in the covenant of innocent love. Can you communicate? Can you name? When covenant relationship is destroyed, communication and naming in truth are one of the first casualties. We human beings are creatures of covenant, and human words are supposed to be bearers of the covenant. In the Christian tradition, the origin of all things, including human words, is the eternal Word, through whom all things were made. So the name of the Son of God is the Word of God. And in the fullness of God's covenant, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Ordinary human words are related to and tend towards the eternal Word, now present in ordinary flesh. Human words can speak the eternal Word, and the eternal Word now speaks human words. And by listening to the Word of life, by beholding the Word made flesh, touching Him, our words participate more and more in the Word, and we are equipped to proclaim the Word. So to speak of God is to speak of and to listen to the Word. It is not just strategy. It is approaching the secret of the Word of God, who spoke in simple human words. Imagine the Son of God saying, "Look at the birds of the air. Zacchaeus, I must stay at your house today." To the woman, "Give me a drink." Or to the disciples, "Have you anything here to eat?" Our words. When I read my doctoral dissertation, my own parents won't be able to understand what I have written. Words, words, words. In the context of what? Of covenant? And if people don't understand our words, we say, "Oh, because we are profound." Or is it because we have been cut off from a covenant relationship? But speaking the truth of God's Word, who is Jesus, demands being rooted in the truth of the human condition, the way He embraced the human condition. Haddad points to the inexpressible consciousness of evil and death as one such condition. And we see it now. In Lebanon, I visited refugee camps. There are 2 million refugees now in Lebanon. Oh, you're confronted with this mystery of evil and death. That's one human condition. But the other is the ineffable joy of living. Another human condition, which I also saw in the same refugee camp. But these two human conditions, evil and death, and the joy of living, render us silent. The truth of the human word comes from an encounter between the silence of the inexpressible and the silence of the ineffable. And from those two silences would come a voice, a word. Before evil, the word is lament, a sigh, a prayer. But before ineffable joy, you sing. You give voice to a song. I hope universities could teach their students how to speak, how to truly communicate the way the eternal word communicates, by embracing the human condition and in silence would pray and would sing. We can learn how to speak of God effectively from simple people. A Filipino woman working for a family in Italy, in northern Italy, one of the many Filipino migrant workers in Italy. She told me once, every time I prepare the meal of the 2 Italian children I am taking care of, I wonder who is preparing food for my children left in the Philippines. This is the daily cry on the cross of a migrant mother. Then she continued, but when I look at these two beautiful Italian children before me, I decide to give them the love that I want my own children to receive. Lament has turned into a song of joy. Because the covenant relationship is never broken. It is this covenant relationship that enables us to communicate. Am I still communicating? Okay, that's the first, communication. And if there are communicators here, experts in communication, this is one contribution that we could make. The second is the world of inequality and even of exclusion, which we all know, which we all experience, and which should be the concern of scholars. So from communication, I now move to maybe economics, finance, and even politics, international relations even. Now, Pope John Paul II, reflecting on human society 20 years after Pope Paul VI's Populorum Progressio, by the way, it's the 50th anniversary this year of Populorum Progressio, he remarked, Pope John Paul II said, looking at all the various sectors, the production and distribution of foodstuff, hygiene, health and housing, availability of drinking water, working conditions, especially for women, life expectancy, and other economic and social indicators, the general picture is a disappointing one, both considered in itself and in relation to the corresponding data of the more developed countries. The word gap returns spontaneously to mind. And Pope Benedict XVI added in Caritas in Veritate, it is true that growth has taken place, and it continues to be a positive factor that has lifted billions of people out of misery. Recently, it has given many countries the possibility of becoming effective players in international politics. Yet, it must be acknowledged that this same economic growth has been and continues to be weighed down by malfunctions and dramatic problems, highlighted even further by the current crisis. And Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium says, today, everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized, without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. Human beings are themselves considered consumer goods to be used and then discarded. We have created a throwaway culture which is now spreading. It is no longer simply about exploitation and oppression, but something new. Exclusion ultimately has to do with what it means to be a part of the society in which we live. Those excluded are no longer society's underside or its fringes, They are no longer even part of it. The excluded are not the exploited, but the outcast, the leftovers. So, from Populorum Progressio, 50 years ago up to now, popes, the recent popes, have been telling the world, open your eyes, what's happening? They just concluded the World Economic Forum in Davos. And, 3 years ago, the president of Davos, the World Economic Forum, invited me to attend. And yeah. This year, before the official opening, a study made by Oxfam revealed that the 8 richest persons in the world are as rich as half of the world. 8 persons are as rich as 3.6 billion people in the world. The executive director of Oxfam said, it is obscene for so much wealth to be held in the hands of so few, when 1 in 10 people survive on less than $2 a day. Last year, there were 62 richest persons who held half of the wealth of the world. Now there are only 8. Next year, probably 2. Oh, it's really a scandal. It's really a scandal. What could the Christian tradition contribute? We say many things, but of those things, first, a return to a view of life as gift, as grace, the primacy of gratuitousness, which is totally ignored in a consumerist, pragmatic, and utilitarian view of life. An exclusively functional vision of life convinces us wrongly that we are the source and author of ourselves, of human life, and of all aspects of society. Everything is about my achievement. Nothing is received. It is even an insult to receive. What gives me dignity is achievement. And better still, if I achieve things single-handedly. If somebody helps me, oh, my self-worth is hurt. There is no room for mutuality and help. Such a worldview eliminates gratitude, trust, and genuine sharing. Gratuitousness, fraternity, and sorority come together. Yes, we need commutative justice. But, as Pope Benedict would warn us, where giving and receiving is reduced to a transaction based on strict equivalence, it could lead to a forgetfulness of distributive and social justice rooted in solidarity. You know, one of my most harrowing experiences as a bishop was when I presided at the funeral liturgy of 2 children, aged 6 and 5. They were siblings. They died after eating food picked up by their father from a garbage can near a restaurant. As a routine, the father went scavenging for food discarded by clients of restaurants. He did this whenever he failed to earn enough money to buy food for his family. He boiled the trash food, spiced it up again, and served it to his family. But that fateful evening, his 2 children got poisoned and died. What could you say to that family at the funeral service? How do you proclaim the good news? But in my mind there was a nagging question. Why does food have to become trash first before it is given to children? Why could it not be given as a gift and not as trash? Something is wrong with a society where trash becomes food. But there is an invitation for us to rediscover who we are. Are we just consumers? No. Are we just owners? No. The biblical tradition reminds us that if there is a creator who graces us, then we are stewards. We're not owners. And a steward respects the will of the true owner. A steward does not pretend to be the owner. A steward does not misuse or abuse the gift of creation, as affirmed by Pope Francis in Laudato Si. That's why he calls for a conversion to integral ecology that links environmental ecology with human ecology. Then, from this perspective, we understand the common good. Economic activity as an engine for wealth generation must be coupled with distributive justice in order to achieve the common good. The social environment that would enable individuals to grow. So it is not me against the common good. The common good would redound to my personal good. And finally, 5 more minutes. Yeah, helping heal the wounds of the world. You know, there are many wounds in our world right now. Infidelity and failed relationship in families. Lack of nutritious food would wounds the physical and even the mental development of children. Indigenous cultures and wisdoms are wounded by cultures pretending to be superior to them. Individualism, with its one-sided emphasis on personal rights, often wounds the capacity to take care of other persons. And according to Christine Sunakoro, there are social forms of individualism, like ethnocentrism, nationalistic xenophobia, religious intolerance. David Izuzquiza, Jesuit from Spain, rightly observes that individualism stigmatizes the strangers, those in the minority, the migrants, the poor. It discriminates against them and blames them for the problems of society. Scapegoating. Even social media and technology, with all their good contributions, have become tools of violence, corruption, exploitation of children and women through cyber sex. Oh, the wounds are many. How do we help heal the wounds? I know the different sectors in society, especially in the university, are trying to address the different types of wounds. But let us turn to the biblical tradition. The appearance of the risen Lord to the disciples, according to St. John, the 20th chapter. He appears to them and shows them the wounds in his hands and his side. Thomas was not with the 12, or with the 11. But then, when they told him, we had seen the Lord, he did not believe them. But I could not blame him. Who would believe Peter? Who would believe all of these people? He was wise. But the risen Lord comes again, and this time Thomas was with them. And the risen Lord said, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and bring your hand and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believe." Thomas answered, "My Lord and my God." The risen Jesus shows his wounds to his disciples. He invites them to look at his wounds, and even insists, especially to Thomas, to put his finger into his wounds and to bring his hand into the wound of his side. Now please try to imagine. If you were Thomas, how would you have felt? From seeing and touching the wounds of the risen Lord, Thomas makes the supreme profession of faith: "My Lord and my God." Seeing and touching wounds are fundamental to the act of faith. The resurrection is not an effacement or a devaluation of the cross. And here I quote Monsignor Thomas Halleck, who was given the prestigious Templeton Prize. He said, "Wounds remain wounds. Our world is full of wounds. It is my conviction that those who close their eyes to the wounds in our world have no right to say, 'My Lord and my God.'" Harsh words, huh? For Monsignor Halleck, touching the wounds of Christ in the wounds of humanity is a condition for authentic faith. Faith is born and reborn only from the wounds of the crucified and risen Lord, seen and touched in the wounds of humankind. Only a wounded faith is credible. But our world is becoming an expert in denying wounds. We even deny death. When you go to the wakes, they make the ambiance, like a fairy tale, so that you forget about death. Roberto Goizueta claims that the denial of wounds and death leads to the death of others and our own death. I think we're afraid of seeing and touching wounds because we're afraid of facing our own wounds and our own mortality. But if we deny death, according to Goizueta, we inflict death. We inflict it also on ourselves. The fear of pain and vulnerability that causes us to shun real relationships, to shun true love that always involves surrender and vulnerability in the face of mixed peoples and languages. This will kill our capacity to love. And when we cannot love anymore, we inflict harm on others. So seeing and touching wounds builds brotherhood, sisterhood, community. But it is just human. It is communion with the risen Lord. In the wounds of the risen Lord present in the wounds of the world. And I will close with this. Last October 2015, I visited the refugee camp in Idomeni, Greece, near the border with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. At that time, the border was still open. Thousands of hungry, tired, and desperate people fleeing from the wars in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and even Sudan were able to carry only their clothing and the most precious to them, their families. Their families. You see their wounds, and there I smell their wounds. And you touch their wounds. There was so much anguish, but there was also so much courage, dignity, and valiant efforts to keep hope alive. The one supervising the humanitarian assistance was a lady. Later on, I learned that she was the vice mayor of the town. So when there was a lull in the activity, I asked her if it was part of her responsibility as vice mayor to supervise the relief efforts. She said, no, this is volunteer work. I volunteered to work in the camp. Surprised that she embraced additional tasks, I asked her, why? Don't you have enough work to do as vice mayor? Why look for more responsibilities? Then she said, my ancestors were refugees too. I have refugee DNA. They are my brothers and sisters. I cannot abandon them. This is not work. These are words of love coming from a woman, the fruit of generations of wounded refugees. And by bearing those wounds and touching them again, she fosters with them a deep communion. So in that desert of misery, you see a flower blooming. Love is real. Communion is real. Neighborliness is real. And when I was about to leave the camp, I got lost. So I asked, where is the exit? And the person I asked said, oh, you're standing right there at the exit. And she pointed to a sign up there. I said, oh, how would I have missed it? It was a sign. Ex Odos. The way out. Exodus. Ex Odos. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and sent a message to the Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis. I said, Michelle, you won't believe this. I'm standing beneath the sign which says, Exodus. And he replied, then God must be there. Yes, God is there. God is there. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Your Eminence, for such a eloquent, moving, and challenging a lecture, which has shown us, I think, how the Catholic sacramental worldview, way of looking at things, can help us here in the university to sort of wake up and rediscover who we are and to look afresh, to see reality. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've got plenty of time for questions, interactions from the floor, and so could I ask you to say clearly your name and perhaps stand up and keep the questions relatively brief.
Your Eminence, thank you very much. My name is Michael Miller. I was struck by your comments on the socioeconomic situation we find ourselves in, and it reminded me of a complaint that a certain libertarian economist and political commentator that I follow often makes when people, particularly of religious persuasion, shout, "Something must be done." They often expect other people to do it. Often in the Cambridge context, particularly for those of us who study theory, not practice, we don't formulate practical responses, it's very tempting to shout something must be done, particularly in the field of economics. But very often when challenged what exactly that is, we have no answer. And I often feel that as a Catholic in the university, I would be in a much stronger position if you like, the Church not only had certain general principles as part of its social teaching, but actually had textbooks of, if you like, Catholic economics. We don't have them. I'd be very interested to know whether you think that there's a place for Catholic theologians, philosophers, political scientists, economists who share the faith actually to develop something like that for use in the university, or whether that is actually beyond the remit of Catholic contribution. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that question and that observation. And I think it's universally true that people are expecting of us, some action, not only among the business people and the theoreticians, but also among the religious communities and the dioceses. Yeah, Vatican II recognizes the relative autonomy of the secular order. So like the world of economics has its own inner working, and as you had mentioned, this respect. Now, it doesn't mean that that world should refrain from any of the religious principles in crafting what could be a viable economic system, or even economic policies that could implement the vision. I think it is laudable, and we hope more economists could venture into it. The Focolare movement is experimenting on it. They call it an economy of communion. So some of their members who work in companies are trying their best to translate into policies, institutional reform, and structures the spirit of communion, but applied into like a concrete business enterprise. I think a few days ago they presented some of their best experiences and practices to an office in the Vatican. So such an important experiment. But the other thing I want to say is there are some members of religious communities here. Religious life based on the vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and community life, could be a model of that new economics based on sharing, based on sobriety. sobriety. And, yeah, you know. So it is not just economics, it's also lifestyle. Really lifestyle. And so the conversion of the mind and the heart, you know, that must accompany the implementation of some of these economic principles, like common good. Now, there will be no promotion of common good, of the common good, if I would not put a stop, or at least a check, to my greed and my desire to accumulate. You know, so there is a lot of internal processes that must also enter. And finally, I guess many organizations related to different churches engage in humanitarian help. So, as a single institution, I think the Christian body is the biggest social service arm that humanity has seen. You know? But we don't publicize. No. I guess we still have to find the right balance. How do you make these things known without being self-referential and being self-promotional? How do we make these things known as proclamation of the good news in action, sharing, helping the poor? You know, sometimes we're afraid that by proclaiming these things, people might accuse us that, so you are flaunting your your achievements and whatnot. But there is a lot of economic change in the lives of the poor because of the assistance, you know, in justice and in charity coming from church-inspired, faith-inspired individuals and groups. Well, by the way, when I was a university student, one professor required us to read E. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful.
Yes.
Is that standard reading in economics, right? Because now I think big is beautiful rather than small is beautiful. But at the time, in the 1970s, that was the economic model that was presented to us in our economics classes. E. Schumacher. I saw some people nodding. So we belong to the same generation.
Your Eminence, my name is Liam Ong, and I would like to ask, in reference to the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, I think, banning its pro-life group, how we as Catholics in a culture in the university that, while happy to allow us to call ourselves Catholic, may not necessarily always be happy for us truly to be Catholic in all its senses. How we allow the covenant to shine through, and how we can communicate with people who are fundamentally shut to what we have to say.
Yeah. That would be a topic of another conference. I'm not too familiar with what's happening in the University of Glasgow, but this is not the first time that something like this happens. You know, the history of the church, you'd always have some of these clashes. You know, I would speak for myself. Don't take this as the Catholic word or the final word in this. No. I guess this is an area where where we need a deeper and maybe a more refined and nuanced understanding of tradition, which would include fidelity. Because identity would require fidelity to the original inspiration or to the original message. At the same time, fidelity is not just looking back and repeating and in exactly the same terms, and also in the same manner, what I consider the inspirational or foundational message. Sometimes innovation, innovation in the way the message is expressed and lived in changing context is the best way to be faithful. Now, it's easy to say that, when the art of doing that is messy. Especially when you have in the same family, like for example, Catholic family, members who in conscience have different ways of approaching their faith. Here enters communication. When there's a breakdown in communication, then we start being polarized, and we start judging the people who are different from us without fully understanding those whom we judge. So for me, it's the tedious and long process of listening and then really allowing the people who disagree to be frank and to be honest, and for us to listen with the trust that these people mean well. Yeah, I think I better stop there. Yeah, but it involves a lot of internal processes. Just to give you an example. I was in a this was years ago. I was not yet a bishop at the time, and I think it was the 5th anniversary of the closing of Vatican II or something. I was still a seminarian, and I was asked to give a short reflection on one of the documents of Vatican II. So I gave my piece, and I was very young at the time, very young. Then one person in the audience raised his hand and said, "Brother," and said, "I totally disagree with your interpretation of Vatican II." And I said, "Well, thank you for expressing your disagreement." And then he said, "But looking at you," said, "I realized you are sincere." And he said, "So I listened." I said, "You see, I'm still here at the end of the conference." So I said, how do we regain that sincerity? How do we, not for show, how do we communicate that sincerity? And we hope through that sincerity we could, discover that yes, there are deviations, but there are also some faithful interpretations of the original inspiration. This is my learning also, dealing with the youth. I'm very much interested in the digital world, not in order to learn how to use the gadgets, but the impact on the worldview. I was telling Dr. Patrick on the way here from the airport, in one parish celebration in Manila 3 weeks ago, I mingled with the people, and I saw a family. The father was carrying a baby, and I learned later on that he just turned 1, very young. And the mother, took out her cell phone, and wanted to check on the message. And I saw the baby, doing this. I said, wow. I learned how to do that only last year. And somebody gifted me with the smartphone, But then I said, wow, how does this affect? When I read, my motor behavior is like this. A time will come when this will be a useless motion and will not be associated with reading. Like that. Now, how does that affect? I am a digital migrant. But how are the digital natives? How do they think? How do they... In Davos, they asked me to give a talk on how to be an authentic person when you live in a virtual world. How can you be real and authentic when you are bombarded by virtuality? Yeah. It's for me, your question, would eventually lead to that. When some young people say, "This is my view," do I understand their world? Do I understand their manner of doing things and thinking things out? I have a godson in baptism. I saw him studying for an exam with his ears hooked to a what do you call this, music iPod, with a television on, with a cell phone with one hand. I said, "How can you study?" He said, "If I turn all of this off, I cannot concentrate." So even the word concentration, might mean different things to different generations. So how do you judge? A friend of mine asked me if I could talk with his teenage daughter, who was becoming reclusive, not joining the family for meals or weekends, and they hoped that it was a passing teenage phase in adolescence, but they wanted to be sure that it was just that and nothing deeper, serious. So he said, maybe she would open up to a bishop. If she cannot talk to her brothers and sisters and to her parents, why would she open up to a bishop? But since he is my friend, okay. So the daughter comes. This girl comes to me one afternoon, and just her get-up already told me, this is a postmodern girl. The hairstyle, sculpted like a volcano, and the color combination of the clothes. My mother would have disapproved. I said, no, don't come close to a girl with that color combination of clothing, and quite loud and everything. And the body language told me that she was not at all interested. But then I had started with small talk, and then finally I said, your father wanted to know, is there something bothering you? You're becoming a recluse. And then she turned to me directly. I said, oh no, the fight, the battle will begin. She said, my dad, he forbids me from smoking, but he is a chain smoker. My mom, She reminds me all the time to save on money. But on weekends, she splurges on shopping. They are fake. They are fake. And then looking straight into my eyes, she said, "You are all fake," including me. I was tempted to retort. And I said, "Okay, calm down." And I listened. Listen, ask, is she an enemy? No. She is a friend. She's looking for authenticity. She's looking for integrity, but in the most irreverent manner. At least irreverent according to my standards. But that's how the Spirit would work. So I called up the father and said, "Your daughter is okay. I think I need to talk with you." Yeah, so I gave you these examples to show that this will evolve. This will evolve, but it might require the people of my generation to really enter, and not just conclude that we understand and therefore we can judge.
Time for one more question.
Hello, Cuthbert Hartley, the Dominican brother. I was very struck indeed by your use of the word manipulation and how communication can so easily be manipulative. Whether that be when you're taught how to do public speaking in a certain way in order to pull up the heartstrings and things, but more than that, particularly through digital media, it can be very manipulative. But then, on the other hand, for centuries, the Church has been accused of being the manipulative communicator rather than the secular world being. How do you think that the Church in the modern era can perhaps use the digital media, can perhaps use all these things that you've actually been talking about now, that the young people engage in so much better, without becoming hypocritical and once again becoming manipulative in the way that it evangelizes? Because all of us have that vocation to evangelize via whatever means we can, and yet if we use the very methods of manipulation, are we failing to evangelize authentically?
Are there experts here in communication media? Yes, I think you said it rightly. We're all tempted. We're all tempted to manipulate, and we sometimes pass on to the younger generations the art of manipulation. I have many stories about that, though. Yeah. But the use of the social media. Now, again, I speak as a digital migrant. My initiation into it is rather late compared to the others, and even up to now, I am still fearful, about entering it or fully using it, because I've had some bad experiences. I discovered 4 Facebook accounts using my name that I did not open. And 2 of them are being used to raise money. Raise money for some orphanages in Nigeria. And they've been quite not really successful, but they've gotten some donations. So you feel helpless. Again, I speak for myself. My first response is, this is not just about means of communication. Yes, they are means, but right now it is a world in itself. And it is a culture with its own language, with its own methods, with its own ways of doing things. And with tweets, for example, you have short messages, and then nuances are lost. And you have to save on space and characters, and so even the use and the choice of words, the elegance in language, These are all gone. You know? So for me, first is how do we not only make use of the means of communication for evangelization, but how do we evangelize that world? How do we evangelize that world? For it is operating on values and methods that are really manipulative. And those who are within sometimes don't even realize that they are manipulating, because this is the name of the game. This is how you survive. In the Philippines, we had a forum on this. And we had 3 persons to give a 5-minute talk, each one, on different topics. And there were journalists there. And after the 3 talks, we asked them, how would you report on the talks? One is a newspaper writer, one works on websites, etc. And the 3 of them said, we will reduce each of the lecture to only a few sentences. So one lecturer said, but I gave 3 points. I said, I'm not interested in those 3. The journalist said, I will choose only one, the one that I think is more interesting. Then the lecturer objected and said, but you will be truncating my talk. And I said, but that's your problem. I said, my problem is how to report in such a concise manner. So the whole thought pattern is gone. But what disturbed me was the reporter did not even feel that it might be dishonest. So this is what is required. Something short, even if not nuanced, even if it's not complete, I have something to say. So entering that world, entering that world. And so I've tried. I've offered recollections and retreats to media people, and so far they have been coming. They have been coming. The first one, around 300 of them came. And the second one, around 150. But we just have to, and then as Patrick said, I have a regular show on television, aired by national networks for free. So some of the media people consider me as one of their own, as a friend, and so you're able to enter their world. Yeah. So please, just like his question about economics, in the church we say, oh, this is the new Areopagus. We should go into it, but we are rarely there. We're really rarely there. And so we complain about the quality of the media, but we have not entered it. We have not evangelized it from within. So we have to do it, I think.
Your Eminence, thank you so much for a wonderful lecture, and then an even more wonderful interaction with the questions. You've illustrated very fully, very eloquently, very movingly the riches of the potential mission of the VHI and what the secular university and the Catholic traditions can do together. So thank you very much indeed for that.